Oops. Sorry about that. I wanted to cut down on the glare somewhat. So that's what's responsible for the false start. Hope everybody can hear me okay now. Uh, sound quality is good. We can hear singing and laughing. Thanks. That's wonderful. Someone asked me if that was my background music now, the singing. No, I didn't realize I was singing. It was unconscious. And then I realized I was singing, so of course I stopped. For some reason I was singing Go Tell It on the Mountain. Steve Gonzalez says, crap, I lost my sound messing with my TV. I'll have to hear you later. Cora says, well, the sound quality is good. We can hear singing and laughing. And Margot Shepard joined. Hey, Margot, nice to see you. Okay, please share as much as you can. Let's see if we can't get a few more folks here. Anyway, I'm not going to start with the major topic of the night. Rather, I'm going to start with. By the way, can you see me yet? For some reason, my computer is not showing me on camera, but my XSplit is showing me on camera. Suggests to me I need to refresh this page. Here we go. How about that? I'll bet you can see me now. Can you hear me okay? How about now? Now, it's one of those nights where my CPU capacity is getting strained. I have no idea why. Sometimes it does, sometimes it's fairly low, and I haven't discovered what the variable is yet. But I will look at that. I will see. One of these days, I'll be able to detect what the cause is. In the meantime, I wanted to say a few words about the brouhaha today, because Hillary, in an interview, uh, has delivered a real McCarthyite sneer on Tulsi Gabbard. I should say smear and not sneer, but probably sneer too. Both smear and sneer. Okay, thanks, Margot. And so, hi, honey. There's Bonnie. And so, the smear and the sneer was sort of in this form. Hillary started to warn the interviewer who was chatting with her that the Russians seem to be grooming a candidate to run on a third party basis and to run as a Russian asset. Now, the only candidate that could possibly be in the context of the remarks, okay, of Hillary, which mentioned Syria, was Tulsi. So Tulsi comes on in reply, and she says to Hillary, "Now I know it's you who's been back of the constant hostility of the mainstream people to me in this campaign. You're in back of rigging this campaign against me." And she said, "Why don't you come out of hiding and run for the presidency yourself?" And so she challenged Clinton. And yes, as Cora Emanuel says, at the same time, in the same conversation, Hillary Clinton also smeared Jill Stein, which she's done from time to time actually before, because she recalled that Jill Stein, in her words, had been set up as a Russian asset before in the 2016 election, and that Russia does that from time to time. So Jill Stein also challenged her, said she had no evidence for thinking that, okay, at all. And she challenged Hillary Clinton to a debate. So Hillary Clinton got two challenges for her trouble. But not only two challenges, uh, she was also challenged by many people in the mainstream news who pointed out that she didn't appear to have any evidence for her charges, and they called on her to produce evidence. So the pushback was very quick, and it was very strong, and not just from our group, okay, of alternative media people. It was also pretty strong from some of the mainstream media people, and not just Fox. So Hillary seems for the moment to have turned tail and run and got into hiding again. So Margot says, "Was this to detract from Bernie's rally?" Didn't work. No, it didn't work. I don't think it was to detract, okay, from Bernie's rally. I mean, I don't know what it was for. I think Nico House has a theory that well, he knows that the email investigations by the government for email server are now completed, and she's waiting to hear what the government has to say about her server and the various troubles involved with that. And so maybe she's trying to preempt some of that news by going on the offensive by attacking various people as Trump, as I'm sorry, as the Russian assets. Maybe preparatory to charging that Trump also is a Russian asset, which of course is a popular charge of hers anyway. But I was reflecting, though, on the level of McCarthyism that currently exists in the mainstream of the Democratic Party right now. I mean, they'll say anything about anybody with no evidence whatsoever, no reason at all to support the idea that a particular person is a Russian asset, except, of course, that that person disagrees with them on some vital issue. So, because they disagree with them, of course, they must be a Russian asset. Because who would disagree with Hillary Clinton except a Russian asset, right? So, I thought I wanted to talk about that for a few minutes and join my colleagues in the YouTube sphere who are all pointing out, of course, that this is all highly ridiculous and Hillary should go get lost again because she's not adding anything to the conversation. But the real point being here that it's not simply Hillary, it's that it's become standard operating practice for the pundits in the mainstream to smear people and to use ad hominem attacks. And we really have to stop this. We have to keep on pointing it out. We have to point out it's unreasoning. We have to point out, okay, it's illegitimate. We have to point out it's McCarthyism. It's that old style McCarthyism. That old time religion of the right, okay, in American politics, that these people who claim to be on the left have now picked up. They're not on the left, of course. They were always center right or right. So, of course, It was easy for them to pick up on McCarthyism because they never believed in free speech. They never really believed in our Constitution. They said they did. But when it comes down to it, they'll do anything to win. They don't care how dirty it is, and they don't care about any lack of principle on their part. All they care about is winning. So we got to call them out, and we got to call them out all the time. Every time they smear. Now, Tulsi in particular is the target of smearing, and they want to keep on smearing her. And the reason why they want to keep on smearing her is eventually they want to bleed that over to Bernie. Of course, they smear Bernie all the time anyway, but they want to drive Tulsi away so Bernie can be their main target. Hi, Gary Houck. So now Trump. Oh, I posted the Common Dreams piece on Jill Stein challenging Hillary to a debate. That had a few choice words in it, and a tweet also from Greenwald, actually, Glenn Greenwald, uh, who referred to Hillary as, I won't show the article this time, but let me just catch this again. Hillary strongly implies that Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian asset who will act to serve the Kremlin's interest. Also says there's no doubt Jill Stein is. Does she have evidence for these grave accusations? Of course not. None is needed in Dem Party discourse. It's gutter trash. Yep, that's what it is. It's gutter trash. So let's leave the gutter trash for now. And let's consider some other trash, specifically Donald Trump's conduct, leading, of course, we hope, to impeachment. Don't think that's the article I wanted to begin with, so let me go to the right article. Here it is. It's a truth dig piece called Trump is Getting Off Easy, and it was published on October 17th. And it's by Paul Street, a frequent contributor to Truth Dig and also to Counterpunch. And maybe to Truth Out too. Anyway, I'll go with clearly now so we can skip the extraneous matter. But he points to the fact that the Russiagate investigation finally fizzled out over the summer. And so the mainstream awoke from the Russia conspiracy trap. And so they had to find some other extravaganza to paralyze us with. So they immediately jumped to the major party candidate centered quadrennial presidential electoral extravaganza, says Street. Then came Ukraine Gate like a bolt from the sky, courtesy of a Central Intelligence Agency officer, other national security operatives, and the non-Fox corporate media. In the last week of September, the world learned that on July 25th, 2019, the very day that Special Russiagate prosecutor Mr. Mueller gave his woefully unimpressive testimony to Congress, Trump called the president of the Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, during his conversation, Trump used the threat of withholding American military assistance to pressure Zelensky into helping Trump's ridiculous personal lawyer, the fake diplomat Rudy Giuliani, dig up political dirt on Trump's perceived 2020 presidential rival, former Vice President Joe Biden. As of now, it appears likely Trump will be impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives for this technically criminal abuse of power, compounded by Trump's subsequent illegal intimidation of a, quote, whistleblower, unquote, before the end of the year. It is unlikely, but not unimaginable, that Trump will be removed from office by the U.S. Senate early next year. Now, I don't think it was just a technically criminal abuse of power. I think it not only was an abuse of power, it was a violation of the Constitution. It was essentially not only soliciting, but pressuring for emoluments and using the power of government to do it. So I think we're looking at a violation of the Constitution here, not just a technically criminal abuse of power. But that aside, Street says, what shall we make of it on the port side? That's on the left, of course. It's been hard not to enjoy watching Trump and his defenders squirm. Surely there's no public humiliation too great for this racist, sexist, ecocidal, and fascist menace, one of Paul Street's favorite persons, no doubt, who befouls and endangers the world with his presence in its most powerful office. Street then says, no left worthy of the label would stand in the way of the constitutional defenestration of the neo-fascist malignancy. For those who are puzzled by the term defenestration, it refers to throwing people out of high windows to their deaths. And the term seems to come from what happened in Prague in the early 17th century. There was a little incident where, in a fight between Protestants and Catholics, in Prague, somebody, if I recall correctly, threw a Catholic, maybe it was a priest even, out of a high window to his death. And that has come down in history as the incident of the defenestration of Prague, quote, unquote, a very colorful term. So that's what Paul is referencing here. The constitutional defenestration of the neo-fascist malignancy. This isn't the oligarchic class trying to investigate, impeach, and remove a President Bernie Sanders for trying to tax the rich and or slash the Pentagon budget to pay for universal single-payer national health insurance and or a green jobs program. This is about a leading faction in that class-wielding constitutional powers to consider indicting and perhaps even expelling a neo-fascist menace. Still, an impeachment that is all or mainly over Trump's Zelensky call threatens to give Trump implicit exoneration for numerous other and bigger impeachable crimes and abuses. The progressive activist Roots Action website, and there's a link to the website there, gives the following daunting list, of offenses for which Trump deserves impeachment. I'm not going to list those now because I am going to go to Roots Action and expose you to that whole list in just a minute. But I wanted to call your attention to the fact that Street says Roots Action should have included Trump's worst offense, the criminal acceleration of ecocide, the biggest issue of our or any time. Trump has brazenly violated his oath to serve the general welfare by doing everything he can to turn the world into a giant greenhouse gas chamber as soon as possible. Here we would do well to recall Noam Chomsky's criticism of the de facto impeachment and removal of President Richard Nixon. Watergate was about Nixon's breaking of ruling class norms by needlessly burglarizing the other major imperial party's candidate headquarters. The Watergate hearings evaded Nixon's and Kissinger's mass murderous bombings of Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, their criminal support for a fascist coup in Chile. Uh, yes, it was a fascist coup, and Nixon's vicious fascist style police state repression of the anti war, black freedom, and radical left movements in the United States. Nixon's biggest crimes went unaired and unpunished. It was officially fine for Nixon to inflict monumental murder and mayhem on anti imperial freedom fighters, peasants, and the left at home and abroad. Nixon's only authorized sin was to have stupidly messed with the other American ruling class and imperial party, the Democrats, at home. To make matters worse, Trump impeachment under the supervision of corporate and imperial Democrats like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, net worth of 64 million. Last time I looked, I was sure her net worth was cataloged at something like 105 million, but maybe she had a couple of bad years. Somehow I doubt that, though. Or maybe Paul Street is not including her husband's net worth. So maybe the family net worth is up to 164 million now. That's a possibility too. The House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff and the deep state informants is about Trump putting his personal self-interest above a principle that rests on a great imperialist myth, quote, the national interest. Trump isn't in trouble for bullying the Ukraine. Superpower Uncle Sam bullies other countries all the time. Trump is in hot water because he got caught with his hands in the cookie jar, clumsily injecting his selfish domestic political interests into the all too standard U.S. practice of imperial coercion. U.S. foreign policy is supposed to be about, quote, the national interest, not the political self interest of one man who would like to be a king or dictator with the help of other heads of state. But what is this grand, quote, national interest, unquote, the reigning bipartisan by U.S. political, intellectual, and media elite cite like some holy incantation with Democrats and their media outliers in the lead in the age of Trump. Uh, and then he goes on to say the great American historian Charles Beard was run out of U.S. public intellectual right for having the audacity to, in numerous books, including the, quote, the idea of the national interest, unquote, 1934, and the open door at home, 1934, that the national interest was a veil for ruling class imperialism. Beard, of course, was quite right, and it continued right on being a veil for ruling class imperialism. When I was taking courses and doing my graduate work in comparative politics and in international relations, the national interest was one of the most important concepts in that field. And that idea was being spread all through the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, wholesale, to any undergraduate and graduate students who would listen. The doctrine of a national interest was taught. We never could quite understand what exactly the national interest was, however, because the theoreticians of the time were largely using it as a slogan, and they largely failed to specify the concept in any detail, much less to measure it, so it really could be used as a guide to the general welfare, the national interest, the public purpose, or whatever guiding concept comes about as the rule of the day, or the standard of the day, I should say. So, Empire, Beard argued, worked against the interest of most citizens of the U.S. by hitching economic growth to the profit lust of those atop what would come to be known as the military industrial complex, and by enmeshing the United States in what Beard called, anticipating Orwell, quote, perpetual wars for perpetual peace, unquote. War is peace. That was one of the slogans of Big Brother in 1984, if you recall. In the wake of Beard's warnings and observations, the Pax Americana bloomed, spreading U.S. power across vast stretches of the planet. The United States has been enmeshed ever since in an endless series of wars, interventions, and conflicts, few, if any, of which have ever had the slightest thing to do with the United States, quote, national security, unquote. Also, by the way, the idea of the national interest was never very well specified in terms of the idea of the national security, which was another concept that has not been very well specified to this day, which is what allows the elites to run around to say that whistleblowers violated national security, and so they have to be convicted under the Espionage Act and put into prison for a long time. And then we have trials on what these people did to violate national security. And in those trials, the question of what exactly is national security has never been really taken up. And of course, it is unnecessary the way the law works, uh, not unnecessary, but yes, unnecessary the way the law works for the prosecution in such trials to have to specify what its theory of the national security is, because what's given is some violations of the law that were supposedly passed to enhance uh, uh, the national security. And no fundamental question is ever asked, well, how does this law enhance our national security? Quite the opposite. The American empire, replete now with more than 800 bases spread across more than 100 sovereign nations, has put ordinary Americans at risk at home and abroad while distributing wealth and power upwards. The costs of the empire have been borne by society at large. The benefits, including the massive transfer of taxpayer money away from domestic social needs to giant public subsidies for high-tech corporations like such as Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, and global military protection to the multinational U.S. corporations and investors, have reverted to the wealthy few and their political and military agents and allies. The The bloated military Keynesian Pentagon system has bankrupted social programs, feeding savage domestic socioeconomic disparity while fueling the deadly militarization of society. It has hitched our prosperity to a permanent war economy that is helping drive the world over an ecological cliff while constantly developing new super weapons capable of decimating the world many times over. It is pathetic, contemptible, and criminal for Trump to have strong armed Ukraine in an effort to enlist foreign assistance for Trump's uh, uh, domestic political ambitions. But it is stupid to think that the more standard practices of American imperialism have anything to do with the national interest, quote unquote, of all Americans. The national interest is a great imperial ruling class and Orwellian lie in the hands of the nation's dominant ideological authorities. And of course, I entirely agree with that, which is why I said what I said before. Even if its scope is broadened beyond Ukraine Gate, impeachment is not a popular rebellion against the main capitalist oppression structures of our time, which now pose an existential threat to human survival and must be overcome if we are to preserve chances for a decent and organized existence. It is an elite process designed by the nation's wealthy founders, who considered policy and politics the special concern of the propertied few. The early republic slave owning and merchant capitalist masters believed, and their ruling class counterparts also believe today, that the propertyless and the property poor, the many, the rabble, are not to be trusted with political power. We on the left want to put the quote unquote rabble, the working class majority citizenry, in the streets to confront not just the fascistic Trump and Pence regime and the fascistic Trump base, but also the broader system of empire and equality, of which the Trump regime and Trumpism are part and symptom. Trump is awful, of course, but so is the richly bipartisan system of class and imperial rule that gives rise to monstrous neo fascist and white nationalist actors and forces like Trump and Pence and Trumpism in the first place. Establishment Democrats like Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff and their donors sit atop the other major party wing of the same American corporate imperial bird of prey. They're so vile that several top Democratic Party campaign bankrollers, according to CNBC, are ready to back the malignant neo fascist Trump, not just over the progressive populist and self declared socialist Bernie Sanders, but even over the self declared, quote, capitalist, unquote, and the center left Democrat Elizabeth Warren. The meaningfully democratic way to remove Trump is not through elite procedures designed by 18th century slaveholders for whom democracy was the ultimate nightmare. It is through sustained massive civil disobedience within and beyond the streets, through rebellion by and for those whom the American ruling class fears and hates the most, the working class majority. The left should mobilize to bring the ghastly neo fascist Trump Pence regime down in the same ways the people of Puerto Rico forced out their corrupt and racist, sexist governor, Ricardo Rossello, last summer. The people of Hong Kong won the repeal of an authoritarian extradition law last spring. The French Gilets jaunes, the Yellow Vests, won the repeal of a regressive tax last December. The people of Ecuador won the repeal of a regressive fuel tax and brought a neoliberal austerity program last Sunday. The people of Algeria overthrew an authoritarian regime last spring. An extinction rebellion has put the environmental question front and center. In England, the left must not let the impeachment extravaganza keep millions seated in front of glowing telescreens to be told how the unmentionably disastrous two-party system, the ruling class, corporate media, and the U.S. Constitution work for democracy and the common good. They do no such thing. Does the American ruling class and power elite really and at long last want to rid itself of the racist, sexist, neo fascist, ecocidal atrocity that is Donald Trump? Streets really pouring it on here. Good, let them proceed. We certainly won't stand in their way. There can be no defense of the wannabe fascist strongman Trump. The first president in American history who poses a serious threat not to honor the results of a re-election attempt that doesn't fall his way on the port side. But as I have been saying from the start, the elites hate Trump for reasons very different than ours. Trump impeachment a la Pelosi and Schiff is not really our battle. The left's fight is to build as quickly, deeply, and widely as possible a popular grassroots movement against the fascistic White House and the racist, sexist, imperialist, and ecocidal system of class rise that gave rise to it. That's one point of view. I, of course, don't entirely agree with it, and maybe you'll see why I don't agree with it as I get to the Roots Action website cited by Paul Street here. So let's go to that site now. Okay. Roots Action is run by a number of people, but the founders were Norman Solomon and I believe Jeff Cooper. Let me be clear about that. Oh, here we go. Norman Solomon and Jeff Cohn, the media critic. And Jeffrey Cohn was the other co-founder, and I think these are still the two main personalities. Norman Solomon is also one of the name people high up in the Bernie Sanders campaign. I believe he's a high-level surrogate for the Sanders campaign. But right now, I thought it was important to point out to you the connection between Roots Action and the Bernie campaign. What did I do with my impeachment page here? I think I got rid of it. So let me go back to it again. Hang on just 1 second. I will click on it once again and get my impeachment page up there. Let me make sure you got it. Yep, I think you have. So let me go back. So, I guess I didn't mean to get rid of the top of that. So let me go through that first. These are the categories of violations that Trump has committed and that he could be impeached on. Let's briefly go through the categories. Violation of the Constitution on domestic emoluments. Violation of the Constitution on foreign emoluments. incitement to violence. Now, these are the categories of high crimes, okay, and misdemeanors Trump could be charged with if he so desired. Interference with voting rights, discrimination based on religion, illegal war, illegal threat of nuclear war, um, his abuse of the pardon power, obstruction of justice, his politicizing prosecutions, collusion against the United States with a foreign government, failure to reasonably prepare for or respond to hurricanes Harvey and Maria, separating children and infants from families, illegally attempting to influence an election, tax fraud and public misrepresentation, assaulting freedom of the press, supporting a coup in Venezuela, unconstitutional declaration, okay, of emergency, instructing the Border Patrol to violate the law, refusal to comply with subpoenas, declarations of emergency without basis in order to violate the will of Congress, the illegal the illegal proliferation of nuclear technology, illegally removing the United States from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, seeking to use foreign governments' resources against political rivals, refusal to comply with an impeachment inquiry. So those are all the categories, and then Street has added the category of accelerating the ecocide of the United States to all that. So this is the question that I want to raise. If we impeach Trump for violation of the Foreign Emoluments Clause, okay, and obstruction of justice with respect to attempts to discover the facts about that. The political question is, will this be important enough to undercut his support in the country sufficiently? Or will he still retain the support of 25 to 30% of the people, a large number of whom are willing to engage in violence on his behalf? In other words, are the violations involving the Ukraine serious enough to get by the popular by rationalizations such as, the politicians do this all the time, it's not important, this whole impeachment, okay, was illegal, okay, and illegitimate because it was simply politically motivated. It wasn't really serious enough to warrant, okay, an impeachment. It was just a little peccadillo. So what if he tried to get dirt on Joe Biden? They try to get dirt on each other all the time. So why does it matter? He's been doing a good job for me, and I like him. Okay, and I like what he's doing to the Muslims, and I like what he's doing to the Mexicans, and I like what he's doing to just put all the groups these people don't like. Okay, put them in there, and what will it take to get people like this to basically feel discouraged because there's so much against this guy that even they have to admit that he deserves impeachment. It seems to me you need a broad case, not just a narrow case focused on the Ukraine incident. Now, how far you have to broaden out, I really don't know. You have to look at the opinion polls as you're going forward to see how much of the nation is finally on your side. Okay. I don't think the House should wait for that, but I think what the House should do is to try to really build support for impeachment till it gets to the 70% level or higher, is to impeach on a number of these categories. I think impeachment should be aimed at particular groups within the country that are excited over certain things. It is a political process. It should be geared to politically shift opinion away from Trump and to get all the people, perhaps, or as much of all the people as possible, to consider that Trump actually deserves impeachment even for different reasons. So, how bad are all these things? If we're looking at violation of the Constitution on the domestic emoluments side, it starts right at the beginning. His lease of the old post office building in Washington to get the Trump Hotel violates the law. It violates the General Services lease contract, which states, quote, no elected official of the government of the United States shall be admitted to any share or part of this lease or to any benefit that may arise therefrom, unquote. The GSA's failure, the General Service Administration's failure to enforce that contract against the Trump hotels constitutes an emolument. Trump still owns that hotel. He's an owner of that hotel. The January 16, 2019 report by the Inspector General of the General Services Administration confirmed this, that its failure to enforce that contract is an emolument. So Trump has gotten his people that he appointed to run the General Services Administration to provide him an emolument. That is to approve the lease of the old post office building in Washington, D.C. Since 1980, Trump and his businesses have garnered, according to the New York Times, $885 million in tax breaks, grants, and other subsidies for luxury apartments, hotels, and office buildings in New York. Those subsidies from the state of New York have continued since President Trump took office and constitute emoluments. The Trump Organization receives emoluments from other states as well. In these and many similar actions and decisions, Donald J. Trump has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president and subversive of constitutional government, to the prejudice of the cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, President Donald Trump, by such conduct, is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Violation of the Constitution on foreign emoluments. In his conduct while President of the United States, in violation of his constitutional oath to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty under Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, has illegally received emoluments from foreign governments. Foreign emoluments are banned by the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 9. Got that? Article 1, Section 9. Donald J. Trump's business has licensing deals with two Trump towers in Istanbul, Turkey. Why did Trump so rapidly exceed to what amounted to the demands, the orders given Trump by Erdogan of Turkey? Because Trump's business has licensing deals with two Trump towers in Istanbul, Turkey. Donald J. Trump has stated, I have a little conflict of interest because I have a major building in Istanbul. How do we know this did not determine Trump's decision to have U.S. troops stand aside and allow the Turks to attack the Kurds in Syria? China's state-owned Industrial and Commercial Bank of China is the largest tenant in Trump Tower in New York City. It is also a major lender to the Trump Organization. You got that? The Commercial Bank of China is a major lender to the Trump Organization. Its rent payments and its loans put President Trump in violation of the U.S. Constitution. Foreign emoluments bought by the Chinese. Trump is bought by the Chinese. Foreign diplomats, including the Embassy of Kuwait, have changed their Washington, D.C. hotel and event reservations to Trump International Hotel following Donald J. Trump's election to public office. In these and many similar actions and decisions, President Donald Trump has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president and subversive of constitutional government, to the prejudice of the cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, President Donald J. Trump, by such conduct, is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. By the way, just the other day, the Trump Organization has revealed that the G7 meetings this year are booked for a Trump hotel and golf course in Florida. So all of the foreign visitors will be providing emoluments to Donald J. Trump, who, as the President of the United States, also ordered that the events would take place at his own hotel in the United States. So, those actions are in violation of both the domestic and the foreign emoluments clauses of the Constitution. Incitement to violence. Okay, let me put this on clearly now. I can do that now, I think. All right. I'm in that section of that. All right. In his conduct while President of the United States and while campaigning for election to that office, Donald Trump, in violation of his constitutional oath, faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States in violation of the constitutional duty under Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, quote, to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, unquote, has illegally incited violence within the United States. A partial sampling of public statements by candidate Donald Trump. If I see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of them. I promise you I will pay the legal fees, unquote. Quote, you know what I hate? There's a guy, totally disruptive, throwing punches. We're not allowed to punch back anymore. I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that when they're in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks, unquote. Quote, See the first group. I was nice. Oh, take your time. The second group, I was pretty nice. The third group, I'll be a little more violent. And the fourth group, I'll say, get the hell out of here. Unquote. Quote, I'd like to punch him in the face, I tell you. Unquote. He was swinging. Quote, he was swinging. He was hitting people, and the audience hit back. That's what we need more of. Unquote. Numerous incidents of violence followed these and other similar comments. John Franklin McGraw punched a man in the face at a Trump event. No told inside edition. The next time we see him, we might have to kill him, quote unquote. Donald J. Trump said he was considering paying McGraw's legal bills. Since Trump's election and inauguration, his comments appearing to incite violence have continued, as have incidents of violence in which those participating in violence have pointed to Trump's justification. President Donald J. Trump tweeted a video of himself body slamming a man with an image of CNN superimposed on him. In August 2017, participants in a racist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, credited President Trump with boosting their cause. Their violence included actions that led to a murder charge. President Trump publicly minimized the offense and sought to blame, quote, many sides, unquote. In April 2019, weeks after one of his supporters was arrested by the FBI for threatening to shoot Congressman Ilhan Omar in the head, President Trump tweeted a misleading and inflammatory video promoting just the sort of hatred towards Omar that the man arrested had expressed. In these and similar actions and decisions, President Donald J. Trump has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president and subversive of constitutional government, to the prejudice of the cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, Donald J. Trump, by such conduct, is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Interference with voting rights. Well, I'm not going to continue on with this, but I'll just kind of scroll through. Okay, and you can just see how he's tried to discourage voting, he's tried to suppress voting, and how his campaign organization, Roger Stone's organization, created official looking ID badges for volunteers and asked them to videotape voters and conduct phony exit polls in 9 cities with large minority populations. One such volunteer, Steve Webb of Ohio, told the Boston Globe, I'm going to go right up behind them. I'll do everything legally. I want to see if they're accountable. I'm not going to do anything illegal. I'm going to make them a little bit nervous, unquote. Since becoming president, Donald J. Trump has continued with voter intimidation efforts. He's created a Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity, which has sent letters to states requesting sensitive voter information. Most states have refused, but thousands of people have canceled their registrations rather than have their information turned over to Trump's administration. Okay, let's skip to discrimination based on religion. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution says the president has to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, but Trump has engaged in acts of discrimination in violation of the First Amendment and other laws by seeking to ban people who are Muslims from entering the United States. Donald J. Trump has opened the campaign for promising a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Once in office, he created an executive order that his advisor, Rudy Giuliani, said on Fox News had been drafted after Trump had asked him for the best way to create a Muslim ban, quote, legally, unquote. The order targeted several majority Muslim countries for restrictions on immigration to the United States, but made allowances for people of minority religions within those countries. Trump told the Christian Broadcasting Network that Christian refugees would be given priority. When a federal court stopped this order from taking effect, Trump issued a new one containing, in the words of his advisor, Stephen Miller, quote, minor technical differences, unquote. In these actions, Trump has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president and subversive of constitutional government, to the prejudice of the cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, Donald J. Trump, by such conduct, is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Illegal war. Okay. He's waged numerous wars in violation of the UN Charter and the Kellogg-Briand Pact, both treaties part of the supreme law of the United States under Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. Now, of course, you understand, lots of other presidents have violated those too. So Trump is not the only one. On the other hand, that is not an excuse for not impeaching Trump on these grounds. We have to recognize, though, one of the reasons why the Democratic Party is shying away from a broad bill of particulars in relation to impeachment is because some of the most grave of charges, such as this one, have to do with offenses that other presidents, including Democratic presidents, have been guilty of. Like President Obama, for example. President Trump and his subordinates attempt to mislead the U.S. public and Congress about justification of wars, including by claiming to have knowledge that the Syrian government used chemical weapons, as well as by falsely stating the number of U.S. troops deployed to various wars. President Trump has escalated bombing campaigns in Iraq and Syria, resulting in large numbers of civilian deaths. After campaigning for office in opposition to the war on Afghanistan, Trump has effectively made it a permanent operation. President Trump spoke at the headquarters of the CIA on January 23, 2017, and promoted an illegal policy of waging wars for the theft of resources. Trump has overseen the U.S. military's collaboration in the illegal bombing of Yemen by Saudi Arabia in violation of the Leahy Law and resulting in a severe humanitarian crisis. Another case where Trump is guilty of a violation of laws. And these are high crimes and misdemeanors when a president violates laws relating to war and relating to bombing, where hundreds of thousands of people get killed. That is a high crime and misdemeanor. By these actions, Donald J. Trump has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president and subversive of constitutional government, to the prejudice of the cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States and the world. Wherefore, President Donald J. Trump, by such conduct, is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Okay. Illegal threat, of nuclear war. Well, you know, he's flagrantly threatened nuclear war. He's threatened North by Korea. He has threatened Iran. He goes around threatening other governments with the nuclear war. He has abused the pardon power in his conduct while President of the United States, in violation of his oath to faithfully execute the office of the President, to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, and so on. Under Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, quote, he has to take care the laws be faithfully executed, has issued a pardon for former sheriff of Maricopa County, Arizona, Joe Arpaio, who has been convicted of contempt for failure to comply with a court order in a case charging him with racial discrimination. Arpaio was open about his commission of the underlying crime for which he was found liable in a civil suit. His contempt conviction was for continuing to engage in racial profiling, violating an order from the court to cease doing so. Arpaio set up a prison that he called a concentration camp. It had a high death rate, with deaths often unexplained. He enclosed Latino prisoners with electric fencing. According to Washington Post reporting, Trump has directed his subordinates to illegally seize private land and violate environmental regulations in order to build a wall on the Mexican border, and has promised to pardon all the crimes involved. By this action, he's acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president and subversive of constitutional government, to the president of the cause of law and justice, and so on, so on, so on. Obstruction of justice. The day after Trump was briefed by White House counsel on dishonest statements by then National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who was being investigated by the FBI, Trump met with the director of the FBI, James Comey, and demanded his personal loyalty. 2 weeks later, Trump asked Comey to drop the investigation. Later still, Trump fired Comey. By Trump's own words, his motivation was at least partly to obstruct the investigation. By this action, President Donald Trump has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president, and so on and so forth, and is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Well, I have to say, it served Comey right, because if he had acted in a manner customary for the chief of the FBI and not interfered in the election proceedings until his cases were ready for indictment, then most probably Trump would not have been the president since 2017. Most probably Comey's interference within the last 2 weeks of the campaign was one of the factors creating the margin of victory that Trump had. So maybe Comey earned his karma. But anyway, nevertheless, by such conduct, Trump is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. He also politicized the prosecutions. He has directed or endeavored to direct law enforcement, including the Department of Justice and the FBI, to investigate and prosecute his political adversaries and others, and to not prosecute his political allies. And he's done this for improper purposes not justified by any lawful function of his office, thereby eroding the rule of law, undermining the independence of law enforcement from politics, and compromising the constitutional right to due process of law. On the Friday before Election Day 2017, the president issued a remarkable series of public statements, including on Twitter, pressuring the Department of Justice to investigate Hillary Clinton, the Democratic Party, and other political adversaries. Earlier, the president had called Army soldier Bo Bergdahl a, quote, dirty, rotten traitor, unquote, while court-martial charges were pending. On September 3rd, 2018, President Donald Trump tweeted this, quote, 2 long-running Obama-era investigations of 2 very popular Republican congressmen were brought to a well-publicized charge just ahead of the midterms by the Jeff Sessions Justice Department. 2 easy wins, now in doubt because there is not enough time. Good job, Jeff, unquote. This cannot be read but as potentially influencing the current or future Attorney General or others in law enforcement to politicize prosecutions. In 1940, Attorney General, later Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, who was also, uh, I believe, the Chief Justice, of the Nuremberg courts, warned that, quote, the greatest danger of abuse of prosecuting power, unquote, was, quote, picking the man and then putting investigators to work to pin some offense on him, unquote. The chief executive who uses law enforcement to persecute his enemies is characteristic of a banana republic, not a constitutional republic. Yes, it was characteristic, for example, of the Brazilian actions that led to the impeachment, of Dilma Rousseff and the framing, of Lula da Silva. It's exactly what happened. That is why Republican and Democratic presidents alike have respected the independence of law enforcement. In the case of military courts martials, such as Bergdahl's, this limit is formalized in the prohibition of, quote, command influence, unquote. Congress set a precedent with the second article of impeachment against President Richard Nixon, which cited in its fifth specification his use of federal investigative agencies against his political opponents. Following this precedent, the president's attempts to employ the criminal investigative powers of the federal government against his political opponents, quote, for purposes unrelated to national security, the enforcement of laws, or any other lawful function of his office, unquote, are grounds for impeachment, even if they did not succeed in influencing law enforcement. Collusion against the United States with a foreign government. Donald Trump and his transition team lobbied foreign governments, including those of Egypt and Russia, on behalf of the government of Israel. Trump advisor Michael Flynn has lied to the FBI about talking pre-inauguration to Russia and other countries on behalf of the government of Israel, allegedly at the instruction of Jared Kushner, who reportedly took his direction from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And by the way, just by the way, long before Netanyahu was the prime minister of Israel, back when Jared Kushner was just a kid, and when Netanyahu was here, I believe, to take over the position of ambassador to the UN, he stayed with the Kushner family for a while he was finding suitable digs. And Netanyahu actually shared a bedroom with Kushner at that time. Pretty tight ties there, right? Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted Russia to block or delay a UN resolution against illegal Israeli settlements, because then President of the United States, Barack Obama, had chosen not to veto it. News reports in December 2016 said that Russia, while it did not veto, did try to delay the vote. Also in December 2016, the government of Egypt said it had delayed the vote because President-elect Trump had phoned the president of Egypt on behalf of Israel. So, there you have it. A clear case, another clear case of collusion against the United States with a foreign government, against the interests of the United States with a foreign government. Before Trump was the president. Failure to reasonably prepare for or respond to Hurricanes Harvey and Maria. He has to provide for the common defense. He has to take care of the laws, be faithfully executed, but he's failed to reasonably prepare for events like Hurricane Harvey and Maria, or to adequately respond to those hurricanes. FEMA was without a new director until June of 2017. The National Hurricane Center was without a head from May 2017 through the time of Hurricane Harvey in August. On August 15th, 2017, Trump issued an executive order that rejected the federal flood risk management standard, which had been established by executive order in 2015 and which required that infrastructure be built to withstand flooding. He already had disbanded the advisory committee for the sustained national climate assessment and withdrawn the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement. When Hurricane Harvey hit, President Donald Trump did not engage in rescue and recovery operations on the scale that was required. His subordinates at FEMA proposed that private individuals fund and perform those tasks on their own. When Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico in September 2017, and for the months that followed, President Trump refused significant aid despite widespread devastation, lack of electricity, and lack of medical care. That, according to a study published in the in the New England Journal of Medicine in May 2018, left over 4,600 people dead. The death toll in 9/11 was only 3,000 people. Only 3,000 people. That was a death toll for the whole United States. But the island of Puerto Rico, with what is it? 1/30th of the population of the United States? 120? I don't know. Some extremely small fraction of the population of the United States had 4,600 dead? Of course, due to the hurricane, but much exacerbated by Trump refusing to supply significant aid. For weeks, he blocked aid to Puerto Rico from other nations, refusing to waive the Jones Act as he had done following Hurricane Harvey, even as numerous experts predicted the sort of death and suffering that actually resulted. This alone is impeachable. This alone is impeachable. Separating children and infants from families. All that we've seen at the border. All that we've seen. Putting the thousands of refugee children and infants, separating them from their families, imprisoning them in inhumane conditions, including on military bases and in the private facilities of military contractors, denied access to these sites sought by members of Congress, failed to meet or even to plausibly attempt to meet a court-imposed deadline to reunite children with their families, and defended these policies with hate-inspiring rhetoric, almost certainly resulting in additional violence and cruelty by government employees and private individuals alike. In these actions, Donald J. Trump has abused his high office and violated numerous legal requirements in an explicit effort to punish and deter people who in many cases stand accused of no legal violations themselves and in other cases are accused of a misdemeanor. These actions by President Trump have violated the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which the United States is party, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to which every other nation on earth is party, the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution, the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Supreme Court has maintained the interest of parents in the care, custody, and control of their children is perhaps the oldest of the fundamental liberty interests recognized by the court, unquote. President Trump's subsequent executive order stating that families would be imprisoned as groups rather than being separated would have failed to bring him into compliance with international law or the Constitution, even if implemented. On September 6, 2018, the Trump administration announced a new law that would allow immigrant children with their parents to be imprisoned indefinitely, in violation of a 1997 court settlement agreement that limits the imprisonment of children to 20 days. All impeachable offenses. He's illegally attempted to influence an election. I won't even go through that. His lawyer, Michael Cohen, has admitted to that. His testimony implicates Trump in the crimes of conspiring to make an excessive and illegal campaign contribution. It implicates him in the high crime misdemeanor of attempting to fraudulently influence and quite possibly successfully influence the outcome of a U.S. presidential election. As president, he lied about and tried to cover up his wrongdoing. Tax fraud and public misrepresentation. And according to evidence and documentation made public by the New York Times and not counted by President Trump, he and his siblings committed numerous felonies in the course of obtaining wealth from their father while paying approximately 5% rather than the 55% in taxes that the law required. They did this in part by undervaluing properties, a crime known as appraisal fraud. Donald Trump and his siblings claim that properties given them by their father were worth $41.4 million, but sold those properties for over 16 times that amount during the next decade. Another crime employed was transfer pricing. Well, okay, I'm not going to go through this, but you get the picture. Serious business frauds, high crimes, okay, and misdemeanors. Assaulting the freedom of the press. He's repeatedly undermined the freedom of the press. He's threatened to use libel law to go after media outlets that have displeased him. On March 30th, he tweeted, "The failing New York Times has disgraced the media world, gotten me wrong for 2 solid years. A change of the libel laws." Okay, I'm not going to go through that because the press is, of course, not very popular anyway, and for very good reason. But that doesn't change the fact that Trump's trying to coerce them in all these vague ways are violations of the Constitution, are an abuse, okay, of his office. A serious abuse that threatens to undermine some of our very fundamental freedoms, and that alone justifies the impeachment, okay, of Donald Trump. President Trump's rhetoric has encouraged authoritarian foreign governments to attack the very U.S. media that Trump criticizes, endangering not only press freedoms but the lives and safety of American journalists. On May 2nd, 2017, just ahead of World Press Freedom Day, the Committee to Protect Journalists noted that, quote, President Trump's oft-tweeted fake news epithet, for example, had already been adopted by repressive governments such as China, Syria, and Russia when Trump verbally attacked a correspondent during a February press conference. He was cheered by Turkey President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the world's worst jailer of journalists, when Saudi Arabia murdered U.S. Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. President Trump made extensive efforts to deny the evidence and to prevent or minimize the consequences to the Saudi government, even while continuing his usual verbal attacks on U.S. journalists. I mean, look, folks, this guy's a fascist. All the things that I'm reading through are proof of fascism. They're the actions of a fascist would-be dictator. President Trump's Department of Justice has indicted Australian publisher Julian Assange on espionage charges for WikiLeaks' acts of journalism and publishing. Yes, that too is unconstitutional. That too is an impeachable offense. Trump appointed William Barr as U.S. Attorney General. Barr stated in his confirmation hearings that he might jail journalists for doing their job if that job, quote, hurt the country, unquote. Of course, hurt the country in his judgment, like he's the arbiter of hurting the country, right? But the First Amendment doesn't say that you can jail journalists for hurting the country. It states an absolute right to free press. Freedom of the press is enshrined in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. As Justice Black observed in New York Times versus the United States, in the First Amendment, the Founding Fathers gave the free press the protection it must have to fulfill its essential role in our democracy. The press was to serve the governed, not the governors. The government's power to censor the press was abolished so that the press would remain forever free to censure the government. The press was protected so that it could bear the secrets of government and inform the people. Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government. Unquote. Even a former member of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan, Justice Black, the famous defense of liberty, I should say the famous defender, okay, of liberty in his later life, knew better about the free press than Donald Trump knows. Anyway, a president is certainly free to criticize particular news stories and outlets that he believes are inaccurate, and no above cited tweet or statement standing in isolation would constitute an impeachable offense. However, President Trump's consistent pattern of verbal attacks against journalists and his administration's actions to retaliate against and exclude journalists, combined with threats to take governmental action against news outlets, crosses a line. In the above and many similar actions and decisions, President Donald Trump has acted in a manner contrary to his trust, and so on and so forth. By such conduct is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Next, supporting a coup in Venezuela. Okay, now this article is not only against Trump, but also against Michael Richard Pence. And in his conduct while Vice President of the United States, Michael Richard Pence, in violation of his oath to faithfully execute the oath of Vice President of the United States, support and defend the Constitution of the United States, have damaged the rule of law and endangered international security by supporting a coup attempt in Venezuela. On the evening of January 28, 2019, following years of damaging U.S. sanctions against Venezuela, which followed an unsuccessful 2002 U.S.-supported coup attempt, also an illegal attempt. Vice President Pence reportedly called Juan Guaido and told him that the United States would support him if he were to seize power in Venezuela. The next day, January 23rd, Guaido attempted to do so. That same day, President Trump issued a statement recognizing Guaido as the president of Venezuela, despite the fact that Venezuela had an elected president and that Guaido had no legitimate claim to the presidency. On January 24, 2019, the Trump-Pence administration attempted unsuccessfully to persuade the Organization of American States to recognize Guaido as president. In the above and related actions, President Donald J. Trump and Vice President Michael Richard Pence have acted in a manner contrary to their trust as president and vice president and subversive of constitutional government, to the prejudice of the cause of law, justice, and the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, President Donald J. Trump and Michael Richard Pence, by such conduct, are guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Okay, the next item is the unconstitutional declaration, of an emergency. Why? So Trump could shift funds around to apply them to the wall. In so acting, Trump has violated Article 1, Section 7 of the U.S. Constitution. All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives. He has also, in so acting, violated Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Quote, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law, unquote. The same action also violates the federal anti-deficiency statute by using the United States military to enforce immigration law. President Trump's announced plan would violate the Posse Comitatus Act. In addition, President Trump has abused his power by publicly promoting this action using a series of falsehoods, encouraging fear, bigotry. Okay. So we go through all of this, but this is another impeachable offense. He's instructed, as you know, the Border Patrol to violate the law. I'm not going to go through that one except to say that it's true. There's very, very definite evidence. There's, he said he would grant, he informed Customs and Border Protection Commissioner by Kevin McAleenan that he would grant him a pardon if he was sent to jail for having border agents block asylum seekers from entering the U.S. in defiance of U.S. law. So, another violation of the Constitution, another abuse of power, also another violation of law. Next one is refusal to comply with subpoenas. Next is declaration of emergency without basis in order to violate the will of Congress. He declared a state of emergency in the absence of any actual emergency in order to violate the will of Congress and provide deadly weapons to Saudi Arabia for use in its assault on civilians in Yemen. So, Congress had been blocking the sale of certain weapons to Saudi, and the clear purpose of declaring a false emergency was to subvert the will of Congress. Another impeachable offense. In his conduct while President of the United States, Donald J. Trump has sought to illegally transfer nuclear technology to the government of Saudi Arabia. That was documented in the July 2019 report by the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. Have you noticed how many of these violations of the Constitution have occurred in this very year, while Nancy Pelosi has dithered about starting impeachment proceedings? Yes, many of the violations occurred in 2017 and 2018, but they've accelerated in 2019, and they seem to accelerate every day as Trump gains confidence that nothing will be done to him if he continues to violate the laws and the Constitution. I won't go through this one again. He illegally removed the United States from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The INF Treaty was signed by President Reagan and ratified by consent of the Senate on May 27, 1988, thereby becoming the supreme law of the land under Article 6, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution. The INF Treaty allows withdrawal only if extraordinary events related to the subject matter of this treaty have jeopardized its supreme interests, unquote. The INF Treaty provides for intrusive on-site inspections backed up by mutual verification by satellite and other monitoring mechanisms. And there's a special verification commission that's supposed to be to resolve any disputes or whether violations have occurred. Whether or not Russian development and deployment of its new 9M729 missile constitutes a material breach of the treaty is a matter to be dealt with by the provisions of the treaty itself and cannot satisfy the legal requirement for withdrawal. By illegally withdrawing from the INF Treaty, Trump has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president and subversive of constitutional government to the prejudice of the cause of law, another impeachable offense, in other words. Seeking to use the resources of foreign governments against his political rivals, and that, of course, is the Ukrainian case. And that's another impeachable offense. And then, of course, he's refused continuously to comply with the impeachment inquiry, of Congress. And he keeps on refusing to comply with it. And so that's the whole list compiled by Roots Action. I think it's a very impressive list. I don't think that much more proof than just the statements here would be necessary to justify an indictment by the House of Representatives on all of these counts. And I submit to you that the full weight of such a bill against the president would serve as a motivator for the Senate to do something. Because even if you don't like one of these grounds or two of these grounds, there are so many specific counts here. So many specific counts that we're talking about wholesale violations of law and the Constitution by the President of the United States. That simply cannot and should not be tolerated. It is a moral hazard that threatens the future of the United States. And it is what impeachment was created for. Yes, yes. If Trump were soundly rejected at the polls in 2020, that would bring some justification. But it would not establish that impeachment is a live possibility for any president that commits high crimes, and misdemeanors. Instead, if we don't impeach, it would go far towards establishing that our presidents can violate the law in multiple ways with impunity, and that the law does not apply to our presidents. We must not allow that to take hold. It is very close to being widely accepted already in the United States. We cannot tolerate any more of this. In a way, Nixon was given a pass because he resigned. Now, in Clinton's case, he did something that was relatively trivial. Of course, he perjured himself. But still, the underlying crime was relatively trivial. So you could see why people thought that the impeachment proceedings were a witch hunt. in his case. But Trump's case is far worse than Nixon's was. He has to be brought to the wall. This list of offenses, the weight of them, most people don't know the weight of these offenses. So they're ready to accept the words of the politicians, oh, let's just get him on the Ukrainian affair, and then we'll have him out of office. And then what will happen? The case won't really have been made to the American people at large. So maybe Trump will even run again. But even if he doesn't even run again, there won't be a compelling case made against the various violations that Trump has engaged in. In many cases, those violations relate to substantive issues where the Republican Party stands on different grounds than the Democratic Party. If Trump could be impeached on all of these very broad grounds, it would serve as a background for the 2020 campaign, especially if one of the charges was accelerating the ecocide of the United States. If that were part of the trial, that feeds the campaign on the Green New Deal, doesn't it? Here's an article from by Ryan Grimm from The Intercept. The actual laws Trump has broken just with the Ukraine and China affairs could land him 10 years in prison. I don't think I have time to go through all of this. I want to give you a few minutes. I hope you've been sharing and liking this and are ready to subscribe when I put up the YouTube. But okay, so Grimm says Trump's behavior that these crimes are indictable. Okay, a variety of felony criminal statutes plainly implicate Trump's behavior and come with lengthy prison sentences. The types of sentences doled out for high crimes, to say nothing of misdemeanors. Indeed, many of them are straightforward altogether. If the impeachment inquiry is limited simply to Trump's pressure on the Ukraine, the charges could amount to more than 10 years in prison. Take Section 18, U.S. Code, paragraph 872. I think that's the way you read that. Thanks, honey. I lost that. Excuse me for a minute. Uh, 18 U.S. Code 872, quote, extortion by officers or employees of the United States is a violation of law. Whoever, being an officer or employee of the United States or any department or agency thereof, or representing himself to be or assuming to act as such under color or pretense of office or employment, commits or attempts an act of extortion, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years, or both, unquote. The only question here is the definition of extortion. The law describes it as, quote, the extraction of something of value from another person by threatening or placing that person in fear of injury to any person or kidnapping of any person, unquote. Was the Ukrainian president or any other person put in fear of injury by Trump's move? as Trump's envoys made clear in their since disclosed text messages. But the Ukraine's cooperation in the investigation of Joe and Hunter Biden was driven by the promise of a White House visit for President Zelensky and the threat of withholding military aid. That's not just wrong, as Carlson and Patel rightly acknowledge, it's also a felony, as the president and other Ukrainians no doubt had, quote, fear of injury, unquote. Attorney General Williams Barr, Department of Justice, has declined to press charges against Trump, though the House of Representatives is pushing forward with its impeachment inquiry. In the meantime, Trump has said he will refuse to cooperate with lawful subpoenas, itself a prima facie violation of 2 U.S. Code 192, quote, refusal of witness to testify or produce papers, punishable by a year in prison. Coercing his deputies into joining in the conspiracy would also run afoul of the law. And then he goes through what was done with Bill Taylor, okay, an American diplomat, okay, in the Ukraine, and Gordon Sondland, who just got through testifying. If Taylor felt coerced into helping with a political campaign, that implicates 18 the U.S. Code 610, which covers that crime rather clearly under the title Coercion of Political Activity. And Ryan Grimm then helpfully supplies the law to us and points out the sentence caps at 3 years. And then there's a violation of 18 U.S. Code 595. That statute could add another year to the sentence. So you get the picture. 10 years for the Ukrainian incident, okay, alone. Following, of course, impeachment of Trump. Okay. So, what happened to China? I suppose there are similar charges here with respect to China, or maybe I somehow missed it because it was in another form. This mostly seems to deal with the Ukraine, or Ukraine, uh, as it's called. So let me see what happens when I take this off of clearly. There we go. I seem not able to remove clearly. Let me. Okay, there we go. Let me see how I missed the China affairs. Wait. Ah. Well, the headline reads China, but there's no account. Okay, of what China did here. So the headline seems to be a little off. But okay, that's all right. That's enough for tonight. Anyway, I think I'm going to look in on you on Facebook now. And I think you get the point. If all of the offenses are paraded before the public, okay, in um, the impeachment hearings, their inquiry, uh, and if it's possible for the House to expedite this, in spite of the breadth of the whole thing, okay, the sheer weight, okay, of all the offenses, the sheer weight, okay, of all the offenses is sure to impress the public. I mean, even if they get bored with the particulars, when the list is presented, when the list, okay, is summarized, when there's all this book that is getting thrown at Trump, that is going to affect the campaign. And the way it's going to affect the campaign is that the various charges will tie into policies of the United States that are already being carried out. We know the foreign policy of the United States has been a problem for a very long time. It would get vetted in these hearings, and as a result, get vetted in the campaign going on at the same time. The ecocide charge would get vetted in such a way as to strengthen the Green New Deal. The items dealing with the political prosecutions will serve to fuel attempts to reform the federal government to prevent political prosecutions. And boy, do we need that badly to stop both parties from engaging in that kind of activity, because that kind of activity is terrible for our democracy. So, Ernest Jones says the China stuff was never serious. Okay, from what I've seen. Oh, I don't know. He has commercial interests with the Bank of China right now. He has commercial interests with the Bank of China. There have to be violations there. It is serious. Who knows when his commercial interests with China will begin to affect our foreign policy towards China? We've seen enough to know that he makes foreign policy decisions based on the impact it has on his personal interests and those of his friends. What did he undertake the coup in Venezuela for? Why trouble himself with it? The government down there was already having enough trouble. Why continue the Obama sanctions? He knew that the case against the Venezuelan government was way overblown. Even if he didn't, the charge that that government was a dictatorship shouldn't have bothered Trump. He supports dictatorships all over the world. That wasn't why he wanted a coup in Venezuela. He wanted a coup in Venezuela because he wanted to pay off cronies and contributors. Okay, so my purpose tonight was to get you to see the full weight of what the charges might be and how those charges are pretty much compounding as we speak. The longer Trump is in office, with every additional month, he's likely to commit other violations of the law and other violations of the Constitution. How long will we allow this to go on? Nancy Pelosi must impeach, and she must impeach soon. And then she must put it into the lap of the Senate. To do less is to cost lives around the world in an unpredictable way. Look what's happening to the Kurds right now. Suddenly, he makes a decision to step aside without making provisions to provide any protection for the Kurds. He just does it. And it has already resulted in the deaths of many people in Kurdistan. We don't know how many deaths there will be before this is through. Now, I know the larger issues are that no, he has commercial interests with the Bank of China. With the Bank of China. He owes money to the Bank of China. So, he can cost lives, okay, at any moment. He's unpredictable, irresponsible, has no moral sense. He does everything from the viewpoint of how it's going to benefit him or how it's going to hurt him. He constantly violates his oath of office every single day. It's Nancy Pelosi's duty, which she has been ignoring all this time, her own constitutional oath demands that she get rid of him quickly, and go on to somebody else who will not have the contempt for law and the Constitution that he has. So, I'm calling for your last remarks and comments now, because I'm about to say goodnight. So thank you for coming, and thank you for listening. And maybe I need a refreshing of my page here, because, gee, I tried to refresh the page. What happened? I don't think I ended the damn thing, did I? Hope not. Hello. So let's see. There were an unusually small number of comments here tonight. Margot Shepard says, what can we do about voting machines? We can flood the polling places with observers. Make sure everything is done according to procedures. We can do something else also, but I don't think we can mount a movement to do this sufficiently quickly. And that movement, of course, would be to force passage of a law in Congress, the Tulsi Gabbard's law, to use only paper ballots in the upcoming campaign. There's plenty of time to organize that. There's plenty of time to print up all the ballots, okay, that would be needed. If it takes a little longer to count the votes and come to a decision, that's fine. Paper ballots can be tracked. They can be tracked by people. Okay, they are not unhackable or hackable without actually leaving a trail, okay, of evidence. That's why they're important. So, anyway, I'm going to say goodnight now. And again, thank you for coming. And please share, like, and subscribe this. And remember my Patreon account at patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And good night. I will see you on Monday night.